You're watching the recap of the second episode of Research InSightS Live on refugees and migration.
In the run-up to International Migrants Day, today we'll be focusing on seeking systemic action for refugees and migrants. We're going to do this in 3 blocks with the very special speakers, and we're ready to go into our first one.
Hello. أهلا وسهلا. كيف الحال؟
My name is Tilman Speck.
غانم الحافظ. I am من سوريا.
From Syria.
نعم. أيوة. وصلت امبارح لهون عن طريق البحر.
With a boat?
نعم.
Okay.
يعني أنت قاعد هون؟ أنت من هون؟
No.
سياحة يعني سياحة.
I'm a tourist. I'm only for 2 weeks here in Lesbos.
Yeah, the island of all together. You can find the whole film online. All right, Hannah, I want to ask you just very simply, like what the idea of humanity means to you.
To me, humanity means staying connected to yourself. I think every human being that remains connected to him or herself feels the urge to do something when they see injustice or when they see pain in another human being. And I think it's when we disconnect from ourselves that's where we lose that humanity. I like to believe that it's in our incapability of dealing with those big emotions that make us shut down to people in need. And I think it would be really beautiful to develop our capacity in staying with our emotions and from that connection with another human being, then doing the right thing. The people on this island had the same reflex when the first people arrived in 2015. They collectively helped them. They collectively pulled their blankets out of their houses and were even nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh, wow.
As citizens of Lesbos. When I see these children walking here, I think back of her. There was one little girl in our medical clinic, and I think she was about 4 years old. And I remember doing the physical examination and noticing so many different infections all at the same time. It doesn't matter how well you explain it. This is not okay, and this feels not right. And this is inhumane.
Yeah.
This shouldn't be the way it is. In the chaos of the situation, you see a lot of people really doing their best from their capacity, from their knowledge, from their intention, and that's really beautiful to see. I think that's humanity in action, and that's really gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Zemzem, you're doing research quite close to home for ISS in The Hague on recent Habesha migrants that have come there during the time of COVID.
There are many things that we learned about the vulnerabilities of recent migrants, which has to do with language barriers, for example. It's not only the language barrier by itself, but this language barrier interacts with other problems. For example, financial insecurities. Most temporary jobs were shut down, and they were the first to be fired when the pandemic happened. And they don't have savings and finances to fall into, and some were not even understanding what was taking place, what was at stake. There is also worry about your country of origin, and the hearts and thoughts are torn apart between the place you are living and the place where you come from. And sometimes when we are faced with challenge and vulnerabilities, those also give rise to some form of solidarity, some form of humanity. Initiatives like resource mobilization, where those in the diaspora community were sending the money, sending the masks and sanitizers to the countries of origin.
I do want to bring Dikain to take a different vantage point here as well, because your research is for a large part also about the human reaction of people in a country like Indonesia, in this case, on the receiving side, a reaction to this indefinite transit of refugees in the country.
So when we talk about refugees, we talk about the management of humans, right? Numbers, who gets to go where, who should be resettled where. But what my research tries to do is show it's actually not just a simple management of people. It's really an emotional kind of response. And in a context like Indonesia, when you say, oh, this will cause kecemburuan sosial, which I've maybe too literally translated to social jealousy, it's enough to either create action or stop actions. A lot of refugees stay even a decade. People who come as minors become adults, families start. So, it's a life in limbo during that years of transition. So if you talk to like an Indonesian who knows of the presence of refugees and asks, what is your opinion? Do you think they should be allowed to work? And their response was, no. That will cause social jealousy. I mean, in the sense it's not an affluent society. There's still a lot of problems with poverty. So the mentality of we need to protect us and our people is still very strong. But at the same time, you do see actions of solidarity. You do see people trying to, as you said, like fishermen villages just sharing whatever they have whenever someone gets stranded.
Is there a way to make social jealousy turn that into solidarity more, let's say?
I think it's important for us to see or understand where are our emotional, if we're having an emotional response, what does it come from? What prejudices is it, rooted in? What is the fear that they're going to take our jobs? I mean, this exists in Indonesia as well. Is there ground to it, or do they actually create jobs? So
what can we do to base ourselves more on that idea of humanity? Or the feeling, maybe experience. Me and my questions.
Yeah, it's a hard one, right?
What we are in cannot be done only by the government. So there are initiatives like the help desk. The help desk can be used as a bridge to reach out to marginalized or migrant type of communities. And there is also responsibility of settled migrants to help new migrants. So everybody has a role to play in order for us to achieve this objective of humanity.
So in that sense, it is individual, or like not sitting back and thinking someone else will do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really about what can you yourself do.
There is a need for the government also to come in and work with such initiatives.
It's also a matter of trying to see and make policies that are more accommodative to life on the move, rather than just like assuming life will continue once people are putting in roots.
I'm a bit puzzled with the social jealousy definition. Why do we need a new term when we have xenophobia and racism?
It is definitely racialized, and I think why it's not necessarily xenophobia, it's not looking down on them. It's a fear of someone coming in might become better than us, might take up space that should be ours. So it's such a poignant word or term in this context that the saying of it is enough sometimes to create action. For example, organizations that were meant to distribute resources on refugees will make sure that part of that resources go to the local neighborhood to avoid that kind of so-called social jealousy.
For me, humanity is not a soft thing. When you asked about what can the government do, it's not just asking the government to open their hearts. It's actually asking the government to invest in research, to make, for example, health needs very clear and to base policy on that.
Thea Hilhorst, very happy that you're here.
In the frame of today, what is really important is to just realize something about crisis, and that is that we've always considered that crisis follows from a disaster or from a conflict. What we now see is that some of the most dire situations of humanitarian need originate not from a conflict directly or a disaster directly, but from the simple fact that there's a border that people encounter on the way somewhere. And then at that border, we see humanitarian needs evolve to the level of crisis that are really only because that border. That's why we call them humanitarian borders. And it goes with death, sometimes worse than in war. So if you see what is happening, what has been happening with the people who die crossing the Mediterranean, the numbers are really high. I don't know now, but there was a point when I think even 25% or something of people who would cross would die.
Wow.
Now, they haven't been drowned by European leaders, of course. It's not like Mark Rutte went there to keep their heads under the water. But you might say, and increasingly people say now, leaning on Foucault, but also current authors who write about these situations, like David Keane and Michel Auger, who talk about the politics of letting die. So
Politics of letting die.
Politics of letting die. So it's not like proactively killing, but it is sitting back when you know that people will die by your inaction. There's nothing humane about that.
No.
And we all feel like this cannot be done like this. Even though the solutions may be difficult, we have to find them.
We have a situation now in Europe at our eastern border, let's say, the border between Belarus and Poland, where it's maybe a schoolbook example of what you call a humanitarian border, the situation that's happening there. We have Anna Alboth here. She is a media officer of the Minority Rights Group, and she is now on the border coordinating, collaborating with all the groups that are trying to do something on the ground from a civil society perspective.
I used to work for the last years on all European borders. I've been on the Greek islands, I've been to Canary Islands, I've been on the Balkan route, and I can assure you we are having completely different level of crisis now on the Polish-Belarusian border. What happened? In May, the leader, the dictator of Belarus, decided to start kind of an artificial refugee route. He let people come with planes to Belarus. It was well organized and strategically planned. Well, Poland surprised us very much, introducing, first of all, the emergency zone, which means few kilometers along the whole 418 kilometers border. Nobody could enter, nobody meaning humanitarian organization, human rights organizations, and media. Polish government legalized pushbacks within few days. They've just done all the bad lessons that all European countries were learning in the last 6 years. I had a feeling Poland just jumped on the elevator and went, above everybody else. It means people are dying. And I'm not afraid of saying these very strong words. I've never seen anything like this before. We have right now snow in the forest, we have minus temperatures, and we have thousands of people in the forest. Why they are in the forest? When they cross this fence that you just seen on the video, Polish authorities are as violent and brutal as Belarusian authorities, pushing people back, pushing families back, pushing pregnant women back, pushing disabled people back who ask for asylum in Poland. Sometimes families are being divided, so people are stuck between two very violent groups.
What would be the response that humanitarians and that people there are hoping for?
What we as activists done from the beginning on, we just went there and we are bringing humanitarian aid. We are doing something that big humanitarian organizations should be doing, which means we are going to the forest, hiding from police, from border guards, and from army at night, going with a backpack with warm soup and giving people water. Some people didn't drink for days, giving people food. I met people who didn't eat for 3 weeks, giving people medicine, giving people power banks that they have any chance to be in contact with families, with anybody. Second thing is, of course, this is what all European Union, including Polish government, should be doing, is putting sanction of Lukashenko to stop this artificial move of people. Those who are there, those who are on the border and on the Polish side, they should be immediately brought to warm places, be given food, be given access to lawyers. This is what should happen immediately.
Can you explain to us what's actually going on behind the scenes of such a crisis, kind of the historical, the geographical entanglements that produce this result?
Indeed, this is not the first time, and unfortunately, if it goes like this, it won't be the last. We saw it at the Greek-Turkish border happening, almost in the way that Anna is describing now, actually. It was a similar kind of tragedy, And why not next time? It might be Finland-Russian border, right? So EU really makes itself hostage to this kind of politics. And why it does this is a definitely deliberate policy choice by the EU. There is not a system in Europe itself where people can actually come and seek asylum, right? Mm-hmm. And Thea mentioned this, that this is the crisis of the borders. Yes, indeed, this is the crisis of the borders that the whole Schengen and the Dublin system has created, put in place, and externalizing the whole governance of migration and asylum to third countries like Turkey and the West, the East or the South. We saw this between Italy and Libya. We saw this between Morocco and Spain. So we have been seeing different cycles of this basically in the last 30 years. In the end, people are on the move for various reasons. Those reasons we can discuss in detail, but they are on the move.
Yeah, that's a
and
reality,
then, yeah, it's a reality. And if you want to make it others' problem, this is the way you do it. You can only contain it that long. I mean, they tried every way to contain it in the regions.
Yeah.
But now it's coming here to the home, to the European home. Yeah. It comes as close as it can. And it's obvious it's not going to stop here if the EU doesn't take an entirely different approach to what they understand in terms of mobility, how they see people's right to mobility, basically, everyone's right to mobility.
Yeah. Unfortunately, when it comes in the policies and they're thinking about, okay, we need to save people, but instead of saving people, they are saving their borders. People on the move always happened, and it will gonna happen. Even the crisis we're gonna see in climate change. We can't stop that. We don't know what happened in Netherlands in the upcoming years. And what will we do?
The question is, how can we replace this strategic indifference and get to action instead?
Many things can be done, but it's not a thing. You know, it's not like let us flip policy and now we do it differently and we turn this into that.
No.
Because we also have to realize that these are not easy issues. I think, first, lots of movement today, and we talk about it. There's Afghanistan, there's Syria, there's Yemen, and those are people who cannot move. That's even worse. They are just locked inside their country, being hungry. Even though there are many reasons why people move, one of those reasons consistently is because of unsafety and conflict. So every single effort that can be made internationally to stop those conflicts is a big help for everything. Mm-hmm. I think it's not realistic to think that we can just throw away the border. But in between that situation of an open border and the current situation is a huge, huge gap. If every neighborhood of 1,000 people, can they not handle one extra person? Mm-hmm. That would up the people we can welcome in the Netherlands. We are suddenly talking about 70,000 people that we can bring to the Netherlands. And that's not the numbers we think about. Yeah. Our government will think and fret for 3 weeks whether they can perhaps bring 300 people, or 500. But it's a ridiculous number if you see how big we are. Same for the whole of Europe. And then the reception, it can be so much more humane. As Anna says, it's unacceptable that people have to sit in a forest and be so cold and can't sleep and can't eat and can't drink. I mean, that cannot happen at our border.
What it does, this routinized emergency does, is really helps consolidating this politics of inaction. And the only way to counter this is to actually discuss more the right to mobility, even though this doesn't necessarily have to end in open borders. Exactly, there's 50 shades of gray between the two, right? Different ways to increase legal migration channels, how to cope with resettlement issues, relocation issues, or settlement in the region, all of that. But what we see over the years through these routinized emergencies, that EU member states now consolidated almost their view on the fact that they have to protect their borders. And that's why the whole rhetoric has to be shifted 180% by putting right to mobility at the center stage of the discussion and then we can restart the conversation.
You're talking about the governments, and then I totally agree with everything you say. But one of the things that should happen first is that European governments should listen to European people.
Yeah.
People in Europe are overwhelmingly agreeing that there should be a proper European migration policy. Secondly, people in Europe are by far majority saying that they should have more refugees and adopt them in the country rather than paying other countries to take them. This research was done all over Europe. In the West, the majority was very big.
Yeah.
But also in Eastern Europe, there was still a majority of people who said we want more refugees. So we do care. That's the irony.
I have a feeling that we all should answer ourselves in Europe this question. When we talk about human rights, are we talking about rights of European humans or of all the humans?
We have a little intermezzo for you by the lovely Jamil.
I feel very honored today to present the works of a dear friend of mine, Adesokan, who is a very talented artist from Lagos, Nigeria, and he actually uses waste as a metaphor for displacement and human migration. And these photos are all part of the Passports for Plastic Waste collection. And with this collection, he really shows the deep global inequalities in movement. So you see here plastic actually taking on a human identity through passports. And in this way, Adesokan shows through his art that we live in a world where human migration is inhibited by borders, while waste moves freely. It goes everywhere and anywhere.
We started with kind of the small, the human size, the idea of humanity, and then we spoke about policy, the consequences of our current policy, especially in Europe. Now let's zoom out. Highlight for us some of the key figures that we see when it comes to the bigger picture of refugees and migration.
When we talk about migration and refugees and displacement, we always talk about crises, but I always think it's good to put it in perspective that not the whole world is on the move and not all movement is forced. So the numbers we see up here are the numbers, the trends of forced displacement only, so refugees. And the numbers are big and on the rise, and they're too big, and we should address this. But it's still less than 1% of the world population who is forcibly displaced.
Less than 1%, yeah.
And out of these people, half of them, and it's the Yemen crisis day I referred to this, but half of them are actually stuck inside their own country, so there's internal displacement. We tend to create this impression that the whole world is on the move. There's all this narrative about floods of people coming to Europe, but actually it's less than 1% of the world population that's forcibly displaced. And when you look at migration more at large, I think the numbers are currently about 3.5% of the world population, which means that still 96 or 97% of people are actually living in the country that they were born. And then I think what's important to also address is that displacement is very unequally divided over the world, both in terms of where refugees and forcibly displaced people are coming from. There's 5 countries that produce over half of the refugees, so that's Syria, that's Venezuela, and a couple of other countries.
5 countries produce half of refugees. Wow.
And most of these people are actually hosted in developing countries, so countries that themselves are already struggling to facilitate for their own local populations. In the Netherlands, and a lot of other European countries, there's a lot of debate about the protection in the region, like it's not happening, but actually 73% of people are based in the neighboring countries. And if countries would work together a little bit more, we could solve this. There's so much room for solidarity sharing. From a policy perspective, it's quite important to say that governments are responsible to protect human rights. It's not only this sort of vague concept of humanity or solidarity. They are actually responsible to protect people, not their own citizens, but people that are within their borders or want to get within their borders. As a global community, as governments could easily step up. If you have a system anyway for 500, you could easily do it for 10,000, and that would not be a burden on our society. Of course, you need to look at where are people going to live, where are kids going to be able to go to school. You need to have a system in place for that, but we can easily do that. What I think are inspiring practices are practices where different groups in society get together to campaign for a certain group or for certain protection, where mayors, local municipalities step up and say, yes, our cities are open for people, to host people.
Nanneke, you have researched the role of like mobility, immobility in people's lives in a very intriguing example. African migrants transit through Central America, possibly to get to the US.
When we look at this from a journey or trajectory perspective, so not only looking at the place they come from and the place they go through, but rather at the, what happens while they travel, we see that they get illegalized, racialized, categorized along the way, which means that sometimes they can move in legal ways and sometimes in illegal ways, and this changes. And so this is an important insight because it shows how much this categorization is also a political choice, and then how they are treated and what their possibilities for moving are, and the basic fact whether they will survive a journey or not. When people get stuck in certain places and they stay there for longer, you see there are interactions, right? And, life happens even if you are stuck somewhere. And this means that migration is not just about people who are moving, but also the people along the way. And if we do not take their preoccupations, their concerns seriously, I think the basis for solidarity is can be very thin and can also turn into something else. As you follow people, you see how much they, maybe that's not the right word, how much they are prepared to suffer, but how much they do and continue to do. So the fact that a border is closed will not stop this from happening. It will not stop this human suffering. And I think this is very important to take away.
A group that is missing often in creating these policies or sketching out the way forward is the refugees themselves.
What we as a refugees want as a solution, when it's about resettlement or complementary pathways, about education, about integration, or about rights of movement. We are advocating nothing about us without us, because if we are not part of this circle, we are missing the main deal.
How can we successfully also apply a feminist lens to that? Because I know that's your thing. Mine too, by the way.
Indeed. Women in this debate is still missing, even in Europe. And it's such big shock for me coming from a developing country like Pakistan when I saw that there's a gender lens is missing, and on top of that, intersectional lens is missing. How we make sure when we are talking about any solution, we keep this solution according to the people, according to women, according to LGBTIQ community, according to disabled people.
What do we feel are most like maybe the instruments that we have in terms of how we could move forward from this in a way that we wish we would have done yesterday?
Solidarity is very often interpersonal. It's from people to people. And if we have that opportunity to do things from people to people, it is actually eye-opening. We now have increasingly families in the Netherlands that open their house for 3 months through, I love that word, Care-B&B. Those kind of small things are important, but we still need big things too. And I think the policies that are so complex, if European governments would really let it sink in, that their constituency, their populations are more inclined to help refugees than they are, that should make a difference. From their point of view, the policies are working because there are fewer people coming to Europe. So we need to do a lot of work to tell them, like, what you think is working is not working. It's not sustainable. In the end, you make such dirty hands. You don't want to do that.
What is very important is to, take a broader view of migration, not only a problem of migrants and refugees, but of it's something that affects societies, not only those of origin and destination, but also societies in between. Indeed, yes, people are social creatures and they do want to help, especially when it touches them personally. But I think there are structural problems in the societies that people pass through or that they go through that also need to be addressed.
One thing we really want to focus on within Europe, but maybe also more globally, is to create coalitions of willing governments that are willing to take the first step to step up their resettlement numbers. That's one. And in the European context, very important to relocate people out of these border situations. Resettlement is a way to prevent people from having to take those really dangerous journeys. It's people that have already left their country of origin and sought refugee protection mostly in neighboring states, but can't stay there. So resettlement is basically people that are already recognized as refugees, mostly by the UN Refugee Agency, to bring them to a safe place where they can start rebuilding their life.
Yeah.
And relocation pertains to people who have not yet gone through a procedure of getting refugee status, so they're still asylum seekers, so to say, to relocate them out of the situation where they are to a safer situation where they can have a proper asylum procedure.
We also want to talk about systemic changes, and that goes to the question that Anna left us with about the human rights of all, or human rights for us, because it boils down to that at the end of the day. What we're all talking about here is about global inequality. That's why people are on the move. That is what we are trying to protect here when we talk about our borders. Let's be honest about what we are protecting here. So if we don't really tackle the whole global inequality question, it will be just really putting a Band-Aid on the problem. It will just postponing the real systemic discussions that we need to take.
A paradox is that we seem to separate the politics of the heart and the politics of the head. You know, like, oh, I know you speak with your heart because you want to take over refugees, but if you think with your head, but I do think with my head. And then I think even the most cold-blooded, rational politicians should understand that the politics of resettlement are extremely important for their own country. Because if you don't do more resettlement, by the end of the day, the countries that we are counting on to host refugees, that is Jordan and those kind of places, you know, the countries in the region, their patience is draining out. They say, at some point, they say, well, you can say that you want us to take care of the refugees in the region, that's fine, but if you don't resettle, we don't believe you anymore. By doing what we do today, we honestly sow the problems of tomorrow, and they will come back and haunt us.
It's not entirely true that just helping refugees is prohibited, but there are certain actions that are increasingly being criminalized, and people are then being put through court cases because they are supposedly guilty of human smuggling, for example. That's what's happening a lot. In Hungary, this is happening. In France, this has happened. And in Greece, this is happening. Italy. So that's not a one-off. It's a trend, and it's dangerous, I think. What we can do is expose it, because not a lot of people know it. What we can do is try to bring this to court. There are actually interesting examples of businesses getting together to step up their role to show that refugees, displaced people, are people with skills and talents and ambitions that can actually fulfill labor needs. So there are quite a lot of companies who are showing that they are willing to create places for refugees to work. This is happening in Turkey, in the United States, in Greece. But the business community traditionally is quite hesitant to be very vocal about this.
They need so much more people at the moment. There is such a need for labor. And I see businesses lobby very little for more regular migration, which would make a lot of sense, that many more people can get work permits to come to the Netherlands and work here officially, rather than illegally or through smuggling or some kind of ways. And businesses should feel responsible for that.
The whole pandemic situation has somehow halted migration for different reasons, and that people don't want to migrate or don't need to move anymore, but they simply can't because there's no way to move, which has been convenient for some governments. But it might also be an opportunity. There's less of a political spotlight now. That might be an opportunity to actually talk about rational solutions.
The whole title of this was seeking. We're obviously seeking, right? We're seeking for ways out, for opportunities. Yeah, everyone has a role to play in that. And also, if we literally cannot accept what we see around us and not shut off from it, then everything would probably change. Let's sink in this concept of the politics of letting die, this constant emergency that we're living in the acknowledgement that this is about global inequality. That's the big elephant in the room that Zeynep pointed out. Just work from a different worldview in which equality is the most important, in which solidarity is actionable, and in which humanity is, what we all carry.